everybody. Thank you so much, Martin and Jesse, for inviting me to be here with you today. And congratulations on Project 360. It's truly inspiring to be here today and to hear about the project results. And I used to be at the University of Leicester, so it's great to come back to the university here as well. So this project was born out of some research that I did with the prosecutor's office in a major region of the United States. I'm an experimental psychologist, and in the work that I do, I like to go out into the field and learn about the role that eyewitness identification evidence plays in case dispositions, learn about the factors that seem to influence how it's carried out, and then bring those lessons back into the laboratory so that I could try to tease apart the various factors and get a handle on cause and effect, and then bring that back out into the field to see if what I've learned in the lab makes sense. So with this particular project, where we're looking at the effects of alcohol on memory for sexual assault, it's occurring in the laboratory, but it came out of a project out of the prosecutor's office. We were looking at case dispositions, and I was fascinated to see in these crimes, which were rape, robbery, physical assault, felony cases, that there were so many cases involving eyewitness identification evidence and intoxicated witnesses. In the US, prosecutors, they hold the decision-making regarding whether a case is going to ultimately go forward on criminal charges. And so the cases that I was looking at in the prosecutor's office were a highly select sample. More than 65% of cases that reach the prosecutor's office in the district that I was in are rejected for prosecution. And even at the stage of police decision-making that precedes it, the police were often not issuing the case up to the prosecution level for evaluation. So we know that cases are often weeded out, and so what I was looking at, in essence, were the very best cases, the cases that had the best evidence in terms of physical evidence and also eyewitness evidence, and yet there it was, eyewitness identification evidence. So this is Ronald Cotton. You may have heard of him. He's been in the news quite a lot. He wrote a book with a victim of rape who falsely identified him, and he spent 10 years, more than 10 years, in prison for this crime, for which he was later exonerated via DNA evidence. And in this case, the victim tried very hard, her utmost, to remember what he looked like. She was rehearsing to herself what his face looked like so that she could later identify him, and she was sober. And when you look at the fact that so many of the DNA exoneration cases are sexual violence cases, and it's not surprising. There's DNA evidence in those cases so that you could then compare the evidence left behind with the person who's subsequently arrested. When you look at these cases, you think, oh, if we're issuing these charges in instances in which victims and witnesses are intoxicated, doesn't that raise the possibility that we have many more cases then for which we will have faulty eyewitness identification evidence, faulty eyewitness testimony? And should we perhaps be increasingly skeptical of cases in which we have intoxicated victims and witnesses? And indeed, as hard as we try to investigate these cases, there's a lot of challenges that arise in investigating them. We find that witnesses often offer up inconsistent testimony, or they say that there are gaps in their memories and they simply cannot remember. And so what do you do? Because this is having an impact on the probative value of the testimony insofar as fact-finding is concerned. And it will also have a prejudicial impact on jurors who later will hear that the victim voluntarily consumed alcohol, which is the vast majority of cases. It's voluntary intoxication. What kind of impression will that leave on jurors? And when you look at cases across the criminal justice system in the US as well as here in the UK, which is what's being shown on this slide, we find cases, they fall out at every step along the way. There's massive attrition from victims not reporting to the police, from police not being able to detect the offender or a suspect, to cases falling out even at the stage of prosecution and at trial. And when you think about the fact that an estimated 300 victims is what typically a perpetrator will violate before he's caught, 300 victims. So it's really important then not to just throw the testimony out, you might argue, when you have an intoxicated victim, because it'll perhaps be the only chance that you have to detect one of these sexually violent perpetrators who have victimized so many people. So what I began to ask myself was, okay, so we know that alcohol in laboratory studies has a negative impact on memory. We know that. But what about in the real world, where victims and witnesses, they volunteer their testimony? They determine for themselves what to say to a criminal investigator. And what I became really interested in is whether victims are able to effectively monitor their memory reporting such that they report things only when they're highly confident in the accuracy of those statements. So here's an example to illustrate this. When you think about all of the things that a victim or a witness might remember about a crime, there are some aspects of the crime, especially central, salient aspects, like the perpetrator, that victims and witnesses will remember quite well. And there's other aspects of the crime, more peripheral things, that they won't remember as well. They paid less attention. In the case of alcohol, one thing that it does is that it has this constricting effect on attention, where it focuses people on details that are central and salient. And memory for more peripheral aspects, it's not encoded because there's less attention in the case of someone who's intoxicated to pay to those details that are in the background. So what I wanted to know in looking at people's memories for sexual violence is whether they would evaluate the content of their memory and report those characteristics that were figuring most prominently, that were central, salient, and confidently remembered. And I wanted to know if you see a difference in how the strategies are used depending on whether the victim is sober or intoxicated. We used a somewhat unique procedure for this. I've been using it for the last 10 years in my lab, where we use a virtual sexual assault. I've learned in earlier studies it's really important to simulate consent, that if you were to just give someone a vignette, a hypothetical scenario of rape and say, imagine this happened to you, and then they read it wholesale or listen to it wholesale, it's not as engaging as imagining you're actually in the scenario and making decisions in the scenario. So we use a scenario method where people, they make decisions about whether or not to consent to the sexual activity that's happening. So I just wanted to give you the gist of this research. So we have 180 women who are going to go through this virtual rape procedure. They are university women. It's really difficult to bring people in, working people such as ourselves, into a lab to get intoxicated in the middle of the day. So we have a younger age range of people. We have a very aggressive screening procedure. We want to make sure people don't have a history of drug and alcohol abuse. We want to make sure people aren't pregnant, that they're not using medications that might interact with alcohol. And we, after they pass our screening, believe it or not, we lose about 50% of our participants at this stage. UK participants, they tend to drink a lot, these university students. So we lost a lot of them from the get-go. This is for ethics, for ethical reasons. So then we lead them to think that they're either consuming an alcoholic beverage or a placebo beverage. And we're looking at the effects of alcohol expectations as well on people's memories, the reporting, the way in which they report. Because if they think that they've been drinking, maybe that in and of itself will lead them to perhaps be more cautious in the way they go about reporting their testimony. So we're varying the expectation of having alcohol along with the actual dose of alcohol that people receive. Then we put them through this rape scenario. And it looks something like this. It's really hard to illustrate. People listen to it. They see photos of it. They also read in some instances. A scenario involving the participant having met a man under varying conditions. We use a wide range of different conditions when we do this. And then the idea here is to give them stuff to remember. So because later we're going to ask them, up to 4 months later, what they recall about the incident. So if the woman decides to stay in the scenario, because at this stage in the scenario, he has said, you want to ride home. And so we'll have some percentage of participants opt out and not want to go home with him after having met him, but probably about 80% consent to allow him to give her a ride home. There's going to be increasing intimate contact. This is step 10 for those of you that are reading the slides. We didn't just jump from, want to ride home to now he's caressing you. There's been some steps omitted along the way. Now she's in his house. If she stays all the way through to the end of the scenario, it'll be consensual sexual intercourse that's described. But if she opts out, then a legally definable act of rape will be described. And we don't go into a lot of explicit detail because we don't want to traumatize our participants. We monitor them for up to a month later. We note that they do have memory intrusions and emotional experiences, indicating that even this is quite traumatic for our participants. And then, so we test them up to 4 months later, looking at how much information they report and the accuracy of the information that they report. And then we debrief them, a full debrief, and we offer psychological support if they need it. After doing this for 10 years, our participants report back to us that they're glad to have participated, that they think it's really important work in terms of trying to improve the quality of interviews and the quality of testimony that comes about in these cases. So the gist of the results are this. When you look across the different dosage conditions, so this is no alcohol, this is 0.04, it's about 1.5 drinks. 0.08 is 3 drinks within 15 minutes. So it's not only how much you drink, it's how quickly you drink that affects memory. So at this stage, you should have fragmentary blackouts, not like a block blackout. Like people will remember some aspects of what's happening to them. In the real world, however, we know that alcohol intoxication levels are about 0.17 in terms of black. So we're only kind of getting started in terms of what we really need to be doing to study women's memories under the influence. But again, for ethical reasons, we don't go beyond 0.08 because effectively we're raping our participants, so that's why we don't go beyond 0.08. But what we see, is that when you look at the proportion of questions that they answer, so the number of details that they're providing to us, there's no difference between 0 and 0.04, but at the 0.08 level, there's considerable significant dropout in the amount of information that's reported. And that's true 24 hours later, as well as 4 months later. When you look at the accuracy of the information, interestingly, whether alcohol affects the accuracy of what is reported depends on how you measure accuracy. If you look at overall accuracy in terms of all of the questions that you asked them, what proportion of those are accurate, you do find an alcohol effect in that those who are in the high dose, the 0.08 dose, they are less accurate compared to the other 2 beverage groups. But if you look at just at the information that they report, because they're allowed to say that they don't know on our test, and so if you look at only the questions that they answer, their accuracy does not vary compared to those who had a lower dose or had no alcohol whatsoever. And when you look at what do they accurately remember, it's those central details, things about the perpetrator that they're remembering over more peripheral kinds of information. And so these effects, they've been widely replicated now, showing that people who are under the influence of alcohol, they engage in this quantity-accuracy trade-off, whereby they report less information, but the information that they do report is just as accurate as someone who has not been drinking. So at present, we're taking our findings. We've been working with the police and the CPS to write some recommended national guidelines for how to interview witnesses who are under the influence of alcohol during sexual assault. These are some of the broader implications of our work that we'll be talking about in those recommendations. We know that alcohol doesn't affect the quality of those reports, but it does affect the quantity of information that you get, whereby people who are intoxicated will report less information. We also know, and I haven't had time to talk on, is this repeated interview. Police are often asking us, do we wait until a person sobers up to interview, or should we get in there because in the interest of public safety, we might want to get some information? And actually what the research shows is quite interesting, that if you interview a person while they're intoxicated, it actually has a positive effect on remembering on down the line, that people will, if you want to think of it this way, their memories will freeze in a way, such that the information that they reported at time one, it sticks with them better on down the line. They rehearse it more, perhaps, leading to a better memory for the details that they do remember many months later. I'd like to invite you all, if you're interested, to attend our upcoming conference that we'll be having on July 17th. It's going to be held at the Leicestershire Police Headquarters. We have been very fortunate to work with some excellent people from the Leicestershire area, including Lawrence English, who is the head of the CPA's rape team. as well as from the Signal team. We've been working with DI Remy Gibson and DI Michelle Keene. We've worked with the College of Policing. We worked with ACPO, Dr. Kevin Smith, Rape Crisis, so many others who have helped us understand our data in light of the context in which it's applied in. So if you're interested in attending this conference, or if you'd like to receive a copy of the white paper, please get into touch. Thank you.